You think this is a country? Think again. This is a shell company disguised as a nation. In 2015, they pulled off the greatest legal money laundering scheme in human history. Trillions of dollars appeared out of thin air. GDP spiked by 26% overnight. The world applauded. But today, we are going to rip the mask off. Welcome to the Empire of Lies. To understand how we arrived at this dystopian paradox, we have to go back. We have to forget the gleaming glass skyscrapers of modern Dublin for a moment. We need to travel back to the 1980s. Back then, Ireland wasn't known as the Celtic Tiger. It was known as the sick man of Europe. It was poor. It was agrarian. It was stagnant. Its economy was suffocating under protectionist policies and crushing debt. The country's biggest export wasn't software, or pharmaceuticals, or financial services. Its biggest export was its own people. An entire generation of young Irish men and women, educated but hopeless, packed their bags and left. They went to London, to New York, to Boston, to work on construction sites and in bars. The villages were emptying out. Despair hung over the island like a fog. Staring into the abyss of economic failure, the Irish government made a radical decision. They realized they couldn't compete with Germany on manufacturing. They couldn't compete with London on banking capital. They needed a new edge. They needed something that no one else was willing to offer. They decided to sell the only thing they had total control over: their legal sovereignty. They slashed the corporate tax rate to the bone, 12.5%. At the time, this was shocking. While the US, France, and the UK were taxing corporations at 30 or 40%, Ireland hung out a sign that said, "Come here and you will pay a fraction of that." But a low tax rate was just the bait. The hook was the loopholes. Ireland began to construct a labyrinth of laws designed specifically to allow multinational corporations to bypass the tax codes of other nations. And it worked. The giants came. First Intel and Microsoft, then Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the biggest whale of them all, Apple. They transformed the docks of Dublin from crumbling warehouses into the Silicon Valley of Europe. The economy boomed. The emigration stopped. The Celtic Tiger was born. But when you invite a vampire into your home to protect you, you eventually have to pay a price in blood. The system that saved Ireland eventually mutated into something uncontrollable. So, how does it actually work? How does a company like Apple or Google move billions of dollars in profit around the world without paying taxes on it? It's not as simple as hiding cash in a suitcase. It is a sophisticated dance of intellectual property and corporate law. The most famous version of this dance has a name that sounds like a lunch order, but is actually a weapon of financial mass destruction. The double Irish with a Dutch sandwich. Let's break it down. Let's follow a single dollar to see how it vanishes. Imagine a customer in Berlin walks into a store and buys an iPhone for 1,000 euros. You might think that profit would be taxed in Germany, where the sale happened, or perhaps in the United States, where the phone was designed. You would be wrong. The moment that credit card is swiped, the money begins a journey. It is immediately converted into a royalty payment. Apple tells its German subsidiary, "Hey, to sell that phone, you used our brand and our technology. You owe us a fee." So, the profit flies out of Germany, tax-free, and lands in Ireland, in the accounts of Irish Company A. But wait, if the money stays in Ireland, it gets taxed at 12.5%. For the world's greediest corporations, 12.5% is still too high. They want zero. So, they use the sandwich. They send the money from Ireland to the Netherlands. Why the Netherlands? Because European law allows money to flow between member states without any withholding tax. It's a free pass. The money touches down in Amsterdam for a microsecond, just long enough to be legally routed. And then it bounces back to a second Irish company. And here is the prestige. Here is the magic trick. This second company is incorporated in Dublin. It has an Irish address. It has Irish directors. But under a quirk of Irish law at the time, a company's tax residency wasn't determined by where it was born, but by where it was managed and controlled. And where was the second company managed? In a tiny office on an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, Bermuda. And the corporate tax rate in Bermuda is 0. The money has traveled from Germany, through Ireland, through the Netherlands, back to Ireland, and finally rests in a Caribbean tax haven. It has effectively disappeared from the global tax system. This isn't tax evasion, which is illegal. This is tax avoidance. It is perfectly legal, perfectly scripted, and it allowed companies to accumulate offshore cash piles larger than the GDP of entire nations. The consequence of this system is that Ireland became a hall of mirrors. The economy began to detach from reality. If you walk through the Grand Canal dock area of Dublin today, you see the physical manifestation of this system. Gleaming glass towers, trendy coffee shops, the European headquarters of the masters of the universe. But behind the glass, there are ghosts. In the world of finance, we call them brass plate companies. There are office buildings in Dublin that house thousands of companies, but if you walk in, you won't see thousands of employees. You won't see bustling factory floors. You will see a receptionist, a few filing cabinets, and a wall covered in small brass plaques, each one bearing the name of a global subsidiary holding billions in assets. These companies don't produce anything. They don't manufacture. They don't create. They exist solely to hold rights. They hold the copyright to the software on your laptop. They hold the patent for the pacemaker in your grandfather's chest. Did you know that over 60% of the world's leased commercial aircraft are managed from Ireland? When you board a Delta flight in Atlanta or an Emirates flight in Dubai, legally speaking, that metal tube you were sitting in likely belongs to an Irish entity. This influx of assets creates what economists call phantom FDI, foreign direct investment. It inflates the statistics. It makes Ireland look like an economic superpower. It swells the GDP to bloated levels. But you cannot eat GDP. You cannot live inside a statistic. And this brings us back to that day in 2015, the day of leprechaun economics. Why did the economy jump 26% overnight? Because under pressure to close the double Irish loophole, the corporations didn't leave. They just changed the game. Apple moved its intellectual property, the intangible value of the iPhone brand itself, from offshore havens onshore to Ireland. Overnight, hundreds of billions of dollars of capital landed at Dublin Airport. And the Irish government, ever the faithful servant, introduced a new rule called capital allowances for intangible assets. In plain English, it allowed these companies to write off the cost of bringing that IP to Ireland against their future profits. The result was the same. The tax bill remained near 0. The loophole wasn't closed, it was simply renovated. Now, you might be asking, so what? Why does this matter? If the government gets even a tiny slice of those billions, isn't that good for the Irish people? And this is where the story turns from a financial thriller into a social tragedy. Because when you turn your country into a luxury hotel for global capital, you invite guests who don't care about the residents. The flood of money distorted everything. It turned the island into a casino. Specifically, it attracted the vulture funds. Private equity firms from Wall Street and the City of London looked at Ireland and saw a playground. They saw a tax code full of holes they could exploit. They started buying up property. Not just office buildings, but homes, apartment blocks, entire neighborhoods. They utilized a tax structure known as Section 110. It was originally designed to help companies securitize debt, but the vulture funds used it to hold residential property tax-free. The result is the housing crisis. Today, Dublin is a city of cruel contrasts. Statistically, its citizens are the second wealthiest in Europe, but in reality, a young nurse sleeps in her car because she cannot afford rent. A teacher commutes 3 hours a day because the city is unaffordable. Young people, in their 20s and 30s, are living with their parents, unable to start their lives. Rent for a single small bedroom in a shared house can cost upwards of €1,000 a month. A modest apartment costs $2,500 or $3,000. The supply of housing is strangled. The prices are kept artificially high to satisfy the yield requirements of foreign investment funds. The glass towers of big tech shine brightly through the night, housing servers that process the world's wealth. And in the shadows of those towers, the people who actually built the city are being pushed out. The wealth is everywhere, yet it is nowhere. It is locked in the circuits of the international banking system, untouchable by the common man. This is not just an Irish story. Ireland is simply the most extreme example of a global sickness. It is a symptom of a world where capital has no borders, but people do. Money can move from Berlin to Dublin to Bermuda in a millisecond, but a worker cannot move their family to a safe home. The world is trying to fight back. The G7, the OECD, the United States, they have pushed for a global minimum tax of 15%. They are trying to put a floor under the race to the bottom. But the machine is adaptable. The lawyers are already writing the new rules. The accountants are already finding the new trapdoors. As we look at this invisible empire, we are forced to ask a fundamental question about the 21st century. What is a nation? Is a nation a community of people, striving together for a better life? Or is a nation simply a service provider for global capital, a legal jurisdiction for hire? Ireland won the game of spreadsheets. They have the highest GDP, they have the surplus budgets, they have the favor of the tech oligarchs. But walk the streets of Dublin. Look at the lines for food banks. Look at the despair of a generation locked out of their own future. And ask yourself, what is the point of being the richest country in the world if that wealth is just a ghost passing through your window? Because in the end, you cannot build a society on phantom capital, and you cannot make a home out of a tax loophole.